Benji's journey back to the shelter has been a familiar one, a pattern of return shrouded in mystery. However, one shelter worker was determined to uncover the underlying truth, beginning to unravel the threads that would lead to a sad revelation. Our goal for this video is to reach 6,000 likes, so please like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. Despite his captivating charm and adorable appearance, Benji had spent the past year and a half at the shelter, his hopes of finding a forever home repeatedly dashed. The puzzling truth was that Benji's time at the shelter was minimal, as each return occurred shortly after being adopted. It all began when Benji arrived as a 3-week-old puppy. His initial owners chose to keep 4 of his siblings, leaving Benji on the sidelines, his future uncertain. Despite thorough examinations revealing no underlying health issues, the shelter concluded that Benji had simply been unlucky. With hopes renewed, Benji was quickly placed for adoption. A family that seemed perfect on paper, a young couple with an eager 5-year-old daughter and a mother who worked from home, took him in. It appeared to be a match made in heaven. But just 3 weeks later, Benji was back at the shelter, his former owners offering no clear explanation. Every time Benji was returned, the family would offer a vague reason for the return, an excuse that did not align with what the shelter knew about them. However, the shelter chose not to press the families with too many questions. If they weren't willing to care for Benji, the shelter believed that it was better for the dog to be with them. They remained optimistic, convinced that Benji would quickly find a new owner who would genuinely love him. And at first, they believed that it was just a one-time incident. However, it turned out to be anything but an isolated occurrence. For some inexplicable reason, it kept happening. Benji would get adopted, return to the shelter, and then without fail be adopted again 2 weeks later. The shelter staff was confused by this strange cycle. They couldn't figure out why it kept happening. The reasons people gave for returning Benji didn't make sense and seemed kind of dishonest. Some said Benji had too much energy. Others said he never moved from his bed. Some claimed he was mean to other dogs, while others said he was too scared to go to the park. It was all a bit mixed up. Benji looked sad back in his cage. The 11th owner said he didn't trust people and seemed really unhappy. This reason made sense to the shelter staff. Everyone at the shelter felt responsible for Benji and wanted to fix the problem. Surprisingly, Stacy, who had only been there for 2 weeks, had an idea to help. Stacy, who was studying to be a vet and trainer, spent 2 months volunteering at the shelter. When Benji was returned by his last owner, Stacy saw him for the first time and instantly fell in love with him. Even though she only saw a sad side of Benji, the shelter staff shared stories of how lively and joyful he used to be. They didn't hide the truth. Benji had been returned 11 times for different reasons. Instead of discouraging Stacy, this information fueled her determination. She couldn't bear the idea of more owners misunderstanding Benji. Unfazed, Stacy decided to bring Benji into her life. But there was one problem: convincing her parents. She lived with them at the time and worried that they might not agree. To her surprise, not only were they okay with it, but they'd already been thinking about getting a dog, especially with Stacy potentially moving away soon. With all the paperwork sorted, Stacy was set to take Benji home that same day. For Benji, it was the 12th time going through this routine. However, he appeared almost emotionless, showing the resilience he had developed from the repeated returns to the shelter. During the journey home, Benji didn't show much interest in Stacy. It was clear that rebuilding the trust eroded over time, and restoring him to his cheerful, happy self would take some work. Stacy, though confident in her ability to make a difference, would soon find her confidence tested. Upon reaching home, Stacy's parents warmly welcomed the new family member. Stacy's father had even gone to the pet store to prepare, buying a new bed and bowl. The excitement to care for their new addition filled the household. Luckily, the family already had 3 dogs at home, so having Benji around was not new. Despite being the smallest, Benji somehow made everyone feel a bit uneasy. They couldn't figure out exactly why, and Benji started acting a bit strange, too. It seemed like Benji had had trouble connecting or playing with the other dogs in the house. He mostly stayed in one spot, watching everything. Even though the family tried to take care of him, Benji looked uncomfortable, dampening the expected happiness. The other dogs, more outgoing, noticed Benji when they came into the room. One even brought him a toy. Benji's mood changed a bit. Did he like the attention? The way things were shaping up in the dog family hinted at a tricky adjustment time for this newest member, Benji. Slowly, Benji started to warm up to the attention and began bonding with the other dogs. The family spent the rest of the day making sure Benji had a great time, believing he deserved all the love. They took him to the park, let him choose a new toy at the store, and treated him to a tasty steak. It was a day of pure joy for Benji, evident in his wagging tail. Stacy enjoyed every moment with him, and the whole family seemed to feel the same. The positive vibes were contagious. But would this new connection last? Within just 24 hours, the family had turned Benji back into the happy pup he used to be. They thought that they had found a wonderful addition to the family. Yet the question lingered. Why did Benji face so many returns? Was there something they didn't know yet? But then, one morning, the family woke up to find Benji not in his bed. Panic set in as they searched the whole house, but there was no sign of him. Stacy, feeling responsible, wondered if Benji had escaped or if something more serious had happened. In a desperate effort to find him, Stacy took a week off work. She started by questioning neighbors, hoping someone had seen the puppy, but no luck. It seemed as if Benji had vanished into thin air, leaving Stacy deeply hurt. Despite a morning of questioning and searching, there was still no sign of Benji. With no sightings, the family decided to put up signs, hoping for any leads. Stacy, however, hesitated at the thought of someone from the shelter seeing the posters. She didn't want to disappoint them. 2 more days passed, and Benji remained missing. Despite posters scattered everywhere, there was no response. Finally, the phone rang. Someone had found Benji. The caller, however, was evasive about the details, leaving Stacy on edge. The mix of anticipation and anxiety surged through her veins. What was happening with Benji? An anxious and puzzled Stacy drove to the man's house, nearly an hour away. How had Benji managed to get so far from home? The journey left Stacy both bewildered and curious about what awaited her. When Stacy arrived, the man didn't say much, but led her inside, where she found a sad-looking Benji in a cage. Now, at first, Stacy felt mad at the man for locking up the poor pup, but as he explained, things became clear. Benji had shown up earlier that day. The man, not knowing about the missing posters, had searched for an owner. Finding no one, he planned to call the shelter, since Benji still had a necklace with his number. In that moment, the man saw Benji peacefully exploring the house, thinking he had a well-behaved puppy. But when his cat appeared, Stacy had a bad feeling about what might happen. Benji's behavior suddenly changed as he attacked the man's cat. Quick on his feet, the man stopped Benji before he could hurt the cat, which quickly ran away. Worried for both animals, the man decided to put Benji in the cat's cage. He promptly contacted the shelter, providing a detailed account of the incident. After describing Benji, the shelter instructed him to call Stacy, who was on her way to pick him up. Fortunately, Benji emerged unharmed from the encounter. Checking her phone, Stacy saw several missed calls from the shelter. Well, keeping the incident a secret was no longer possible. Apologizing to Benji, Stacy knew that she had to explain everything to the shelter. Back at the shelter with Benji, Stacy discovered that the other employees had already contacted many of his previous owners to ask about similar experiences. The results were about to uncover more about Benji's complicated history. Talking to each previous owner revealed a consistent story. Benji had been returned because of aggressive behavior towards other animals. This information gave much-needed clarity, providing a real understanding of Benji's past. The previous owners had all hidden the truth because they loved him, fearing that admitting his aggression might lead to him being put down. To prevent more incidents, they returned him to the shelter. In usual situations, Benji might have been considered a dangerous animal and faced euthanasia as a result, but Stacy and the shelter were determined to give him a chance. With a better understanding of the challenge ahead, they started a plan to help Benji. Benji stayed at the shelter for a few weeks, where they worked on building trust with cats. Slowly, they introduced him to a controlled environment. Now, at first, Benji resisted cooperation, but the shelter kept trying. Was it worth it? Well, the process was tough, but they eventually succeeded in dealing with Benji's aggression towards cats, as they never gave up on Benji and kept working with him until they could address the underlying cause. Finally, he was then returned to Stacy and her family. Overjoyed to have Benji back, they now had the dog they always wanted. Showering him with love, Benji, in return, showed his gratitude for the second chance he had been given. They now live happily together in a home without conflict that is filled with love.